Es gab keine Beispiele. Also es war sowieso eine völlig neue Nische in der Form. Es gab, wie gesagt, kleinere Sample Libraries, aber wir haben das ja um den Faktor, ich weiß nicht, ich möchte nicht lügen, 100 mal einfach so, mir nichts, dir nichts, gesagt, das muss so viel größer sein. Ja. Und der Herb ist insofern ein Phänomen, der hat einfach ein unglaubliches Verständnis dafür, was gut klingt und was er hören will. Und das ist jetzt weniger selbstverständlich, als man glaubt, weil viele Leute wissen eben nicht, was sie hören wollen.
Ilio is now very proud to be the North American distributor for this groundbreaking library.
Congratulations.
On 20 incredible years.
Congratulations to 20 years VSL from the entire Best Service team.
Both of us for 20 successful years together. Here's the next 20 years.
Ich weiß, dass wir am Anfang sehr, sehr viel durchaus noch einmal gemacht haben und uns überlegt haben, was kann man an diesem und jenem Prozess verbessern. Und diese ganzen Prozesse mit zu betreuen und auch zu benennen, die Problemkreise und im Fall der Fälle vielleicht sogar wieder Leute finden, die irgendwas wissen und die man da einbinden kann. Das war, glaube ich, schon sehr viel auch meine Funktion in diesen Jahren. Die tatsächlichen Tools, die dann verwendet wurden, waren das, was in diesen Jahren, in diesen frühen an Top-of-the-Line digitalen Bearbeitungswerkzeugen zur Verfügung stand und dann auch sehr bald Inhouse-Entwicklungen, wie man so schön sagt, also quasi kleine Tools, die nur wir hatten, die nur für unsere Anforderungen geschrieben wurden. Das waren erst vergleichsweise triviale Geschichten, die eher so um Stapelverarbeitungen gingen, aber dann auch schon durchaus weiterführende Geschichten wie Sample Rate Conversion zum Beispiel. Wir nehmen in 96 Kilohertz auf, aber die Samples werden immer noch in 44,1 vertrieben, aus dem einfachen Grund, weil es auch eine Datenmengenfrage ist. 44,1 ist halt einfach deutlich weniger als 96 Kilohertz. Ich hatte aus einem Internetforum den Kontakt zu einem gewissen Martin Saletek.
So, where should we start?
We shall start from the beginning.
If we start from really the beginning, like you and me, we met somewhere in 2001, I think. I remember at this time, a lot of people were communicating online over emailing lists. I don't know if this even exists anymore, but back in those days there was this emailing list called Pro Audio. This was a collection of various audio engineers around the globe, where both you and me were a part of, and that's how we met up with Dietz. We learned that VSL was looking for a good sample rate converter to use for converting this extreme amount of samples that they recorded. And there was nothing on the market that really was suitable for them. I think I just sent over like a small sample application to Dietz, and that's where it all started.
Diese Kombination aus, wir nehmen einmal, was da ist und schauen, wie man das aber auch verbessern kann oder vielleicht sinnbringend neu verknüpfen kann, das war eigentlich die Hauptaufgabe dieser frühen Jahre.
Some work was done before by Christian Teuscher, and there was this Legato tool which automated GigaStudio.
Oh, the performance tool. Yeah.
The performance tool, yes. It was all using GigaStudio back then, so it was dependent on the engine.
Right.
Yeah. And somehow, in the beginning, it was just a sample rate converter, and we started communicating with VSL guys, and slowly it transitioned into like, could you do some software for us? And in the beginning, it was just a little here, a little there, and at some point, it became clear that we could replace the whole infrastructure. We could lose GigaStudio altogether and replace the engine that VSL was using with custom software.
All products of the Vienna Symphonic Library are available for GigaStudio and the Magix EXS24.
I didn't have so much contact with VSL until that one point when we drove down to Vienna.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and we stayed at this really crappy hotel, which looked like it was from 100 years ago or something. And then we made the first presentation of the engine for Herb.
Yeah, and Herb was perplexed because we already had some sketches made before that, and there was another project that we were working on that had some sample playback in it, and we thought, okay, you could have this huge text file and you could have all the waves specified and some form of scripting engine where you could, type it comfortably in your text editor. And Herb was like, what's that?
Ich kann keine einzige Zeile coden. Ich kann nur sagen, wie ich gern ein Design hätte, mit dem ich als User gut zurechtkomme und halt ein bisschen antizipieren, wo die Möglichkeiten überhaupt sind in der Software.
Developing software back in those days was very different from how it is today. So
yeah, there weren't many places where you could go and look things up, so you had to just invent things as you go along.
right, there was nothing like Stack Overflow. There were a couple of random forums online, but the latency you had inherent in the system of trying to find information or asking for information from someone, and then getting answers to your questions, it was immense, right? While these days you usually can do a Google search, or you can use ChatGPT or any other kind of tool to just help you on the way. But back in those days, you were really completely on your own.
Yes, but the amount of time we pumped into this, I don't think that anyone else went to such depth in relation to polishing this aspect about how you operate with it. And Herb, he had a very clear idea about how he wants to use the product. That's one thing that VSL was consistently doing. Herb was trying to scale things up, so you give a sample editor where you could drop 3,000 samples and make it play, and he would drop 30,000 samples, and then we had to go back to the drawing board and make it work with better performance. It's still true today that VSL's engine probably is the most optimized on the market. Like if you compare to the existing solutions from other companies, you compare the memory footprint, the performance, I think VSL has among the best optimized cores out there.
Yeah, that could probably be. But like you said, I remember getting those calls from Herb, and like you said, dropping 30,000 samples inside of the editor and nothing works and everything freezes, and he just calls it doesn't work. Yeah. No idea, it just doesn't work.
Well, eventually we made it work.
Ich habe einen tollen Programmierer zu der Zeit gehabt, den George Young, der hat auch in Wien gelebt, und der ist dann zu mir immer am Arbeitsplatz gekommen. Ich habe dann gesagt, das hätte ich gern, so und so und so und so. Und der hat es dann auch alles geschafft umzusetzen.
Vienna Instruments, initially we had this interface that looked like a spaceship with an orb in between and with the tabs around, and that was a creative decision to go with this originally. After that we changed to a more streamlined design, but in the beginning we had this artwork of a strange thing with view meters going around like this and numbers in between. So we had this Vienna Instruments plugin, but you couldn't load too many of them inside a DAW system. So it was clear that you wanted to offload some computational part of it to a different machine. And this is how the idea of Vienna Ensemble appeared, where you would run a certain amount of a graphic interface on one machine, and you would actually run the plugins elsewhere. Or you could also run a small Connect plugin inside your application, your composing application, and have the external mixing engine executed in a separate window where you had mixing tools and you could load plugins, etc.
I think the initial idea behind Vienna Ensemble was really just to make Vienna Instruments multi-timbral. So, because it's inherently designed to be used for one instrument, the Vienna Instrument. And I think by the initial drafts and designs, we considered having this being just a plugin loading the other plugins, running inside of your sequencer. Yeah. But then we implemented this in a way, running a separate standalone application for running the Vienna Instruments. And we used then a network, like a local host network connection, which has been superseded with shared memory and so on. But at that point, I think you said that, you know what, couldn't we just do this on another machine, because it's just networking anyway. And then it was a very quick session to get this code running on a separate machine. Yeah. And that's kind of the birth of Vienna Ensemble 3, which is a terrible name. It's now called Vienna Ensemble Pro, but the initial name was Vienna Ensemble 3. if we're talking about pushing the limits, I also recall specifically the point where Herb was discussing dimension strings. And that, like today, we're quite used to having SSDs. They're a dime a dozen these days, so you can find them anywhere and it's cheap. But this was really before the days of SSDs, right? Yeah. And when we were talking about dimension strings, then it was playback of 4 velocity layers and 8 string players at the same time, and it was close to impossible to envision that even for anyone. But I think when we set off on developing the Vienna Instruments Pro with this stuff in mind, we said at the time we're going to be ready to the market with these kind of strings, the technology will catch up and the SSDs will be ubiquitous at that point.
So that you can actually load up to 16 articulations in one cell, and you can even use cell crossfade to crossfade between articulations with all 8 players. And of course, Humanize plays an important part in such a setup.
Die Sample Library Softwarebranche ist eine kleine Industrie geworden. Ne? Ganz am Anfang waren es wirklich Einzelkämpfer oder es waren Hardwarefirmen, die halt Content in Auftrag gegeben haben, damit sie ihre Hardware damit bestücken können. Ne? Also da war die Hardware total im Vordergrund und es hat dann nicht lange gedauert, auf einmal war die Hardware vollkommen unwichtig, sondern die Sample Library Produzenten waren diejenigen, die die Dinge geschaffen haben, die Leute interessiert hat, ne? Auf welcher Kiste das läuft, und so war dann mehr oder weniger sekundär, die Töne müssen was hergeben. Ne?
Herb has actually had that vision for a long time, that hardware and technology will always play catch up with whatever the vision and the ideas are.
In a way, we were designing for the future always. It wasn't that many things that we were creating at the time when we started developing it, they could only work on the most powerful workstations, and then by the time it was ready, the market was ready for it. So it was actually quite interesting how this worked out.
Es kann nur besser werden. Also die Computer werden nicht langsamer, so nach dem Motto. Ja? Also lass uns lieber jetzt ein bisschen nach den Sternen greifen und das eigentlich fast Unmögliche voraussetzen, weil in 3 Jahren ist es auf einmal Mainstream. Die Mir ist ein begehbarer akustischer Raum. Die Mir ist vielleicht auch ein dreidimensionaler Film eines Raumes, wenn du so willst. Ein Film, da weiß jedes Kind, das ist nicht echt und trotzdem wirkt es so, als wäre es echt, wenn du es dir anschaust. Die Mir basiert eigentlich auf Aufnahmen von Sweeps, also Messtönen, sehr lauten Messtönen, Hunderte. Und es ist tatsächlich eine ziemlich herausfordernde Geschichte, sich über Tage und vor allem Nächte, weil es dann die Umgebung meistens ruhiger ist, um die Ohren zu schlagen und nichts anderes zu hören als permanent den gleichen einminütigen Sinus-Sweep.
Ob der Punkt jetzt unter dem Mikro ist oder?
Unter dem mittleren Ständer.
Also okay.
Ich habe in Graz Elektrotechnik-Toningenieur studiert auf der Kunstuni und auf der Musikuniversität und habe mich da auch mit Ambisonics beschäftigt. Und deswegen hat mich der Dietz dann auch gefragt, ja Martin, magst du dabei sein bei diesem Projekt? Und ich habe dann wieder gesagt, ja, klingt cool, bin dabei. Und so waren wir dann im Konzerthaus und haben das erste Mir-Produkt aufgenommen. Und da gibt es auch ein schönes Video von mir, wo ich noch ein bisschen mehr Haare hatte. Wir haben alle Bodenmarkierungen ausgemessen, den Lautsprecher hingestellt und dann halt aufgenommen. Auch in Nachtsessions, weil es da halt besonders leise ist. Und das waren halt Sweeps, rhythmische Sweeps, das geht dann.
Dann gehst die Box weiterdrehen, 60 Grad und das Ganze wieder von vorne. Die Mir-Aufnahmen waren immer spannend oder anstrengend, aufregend. Wir sind mit einem Rack ausgefahren und haben halt selbst gebastelte Boxenhalterung und Computer und alles Mögliche zusammengestoppelt. Und es waren auf jeden Fall immer lustige Nächte.
Eigentlich muss man die ganze Zeit dabei aufpassen, waren irgendwelche Nebengeräusche, summt irgendwas, hat irgendwas geknackst, hat irgendetwas gepfiffen, haben Kirchenglocken geläutet, hat draußen ein Auto gehupt, ist eine U-Bahn drunten durchgefahren. Und glücklicherweise im Lauf der doch einigen Jahre, die da zwischen Idee und Realisierung und Umsetzung ins Land gingen, sind dann eben klugen Köpfen mit dem Martin Salitec Wege eingefallen, die tatsächlich notwendige Anzahl der Convolutions auf ein viel, viel, viel geringeres Maß herunterzubrechen.
Shall we talk about sequencer?
Shall we talk about the sequencer? Yeah, okay, let's go.
So Vienna Instruments Pro, I actually don't know how many customers are aware of this. It has an internal built sequencer, so you could create sequences where you would play a tune and then you could map it to different keys. And it's like it has a piano roll editor and you could assign different sounds. And I think presently maybe 1% of our customers use it.
I think that's a very optimistic assessment. But I must say that's where we completely went overboard, and also a little bit like that's where Herb did not have any stops on himself. So he does have a lot of great ideas, but sometimes he can definitely go overboard, and this project was just complete nerdism. So we developed this sequencer, which is essentially a little Cubase inside of Vienna Instruments Pro, where each sequence can be triggered by any note on the keyboard, and you have a ton of very complicated editing features and possibilities in there. And even though we created this thing, I think we both will need a manual to understand how it works now. So I would not be able to sit down and create anything beyond like really just the basic little notes in there right now. Half of the features I have no idea what they do anymore.
Activate the velocity switch option and use velocity on the key switches defined in the scale select range to the left to switch between major and minor keys.
What should we discuss next?
Piano robot.
Piano robot, that's your show. I mean, I was not involved in the piano robot at all.
Right.
I know I think you learned a lot of electronics in that project alone, no?
Yeah, I had to learn some physics as well, because at some point it became clear that you couldn't sample pianos with, let's say, 100 velocities by hand. So you needed some form of automation which was completely silent and extremely precise. So in the end we ended up with this piano finger that was a huge electromagnet that was landing on a piano key. It could sample one key at a time only, so you had to move it around. And I had to do the entire thing, including software and hardware, to get this thing done. Although I need to say that from purely craftsmanship and manufacturing of this thing and making it work, the credit goes to Mihi Hula, who created this huge rig of concrete blocks, because the amount of force, I mean, never underestimate the amount of force that you need to put into the piano to get to the highest velocities of the instrument. And if you just use a simple microphone stand, the whole system would jump in the air while working. Like, you couldn't really make it work otherwise. And he put like hundreds of kilograms of concrete blocks around this thing, made a sturdy metal brace, then experimented with a type of coupling that would, what exactly should touch the piano. I even had a silicone finger made from my own finger, but that apparently was too soft, so we ended up with a different solution. And VSL is using this to this day to sample pianos. It could sample 100 velocities. The only thing is that you have to tune the note again and again, because it goes out of tune if you keep pressing it repeatedly.
Wir waren in der Silent Stage, wir haben unser Environment rundherum entwickelt mit der MIA, also mit dieser Reverberation Engine, die halt aus dem trocken aufgenommenen Material den Verhaltenmix liefert. Aber quasi ein Reboot, wo man sagt, man bindet neue Anwender, neue User, die andere Ästhetiken halt bevorzugen. Das war dann irgendwie klar, dass wir diesen Sprung machen wollten. Gesagt, okay, wir gehen noch einmal zurück. Mit all der Erfahrung, die wir halt da gesammelt haben, starten wir quasi das Unternehmen noch einmal ein, mit neuen Recordings von vorne beginnend. Und wir brauchen halt jetzt einen Raum, ne, der entsprechend passt.
Der Orchestersaal ist das größte Instrument eines Orchesters. Ohne den Saal klingt das Orchester zwar jetzt, wahrscheinlich kannst du dem musikalischen Gedanken folgen, aber es ist einfach nicht das, was wir unter Orchester als Gesamtklang bezeichnen würden.
Es war ein Zufall, dass wir dann eben zu dieser Scoring Stage gekommen sind.
Herr Herbert Tutzmann, der hier zu meiner Rechten steht, ist für das alles hier verantwortlich.
He told me that there is a new facility